Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Yeah, it's 10 a.m. Thank you for being here. A beautiful early spring North Dakota day awaits, so we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Carter Fong. I'm the Executive Director at the Dickinson Area Chamber of Commerce. I made the coffee today, and we're glad you're here for our Coffee with the Legislators series. Our Government Relations Committee believes in healthy working relationships between the public and our elected and appointed officials because a well-informed public is in everyone's best interest. We appreciate the chance to get to know our elected leaders in a meaningful way, understanding this is not possible in many larger cities and states. As we begin, we want to thank our hosts at the Dickinson Area Public Library, along with our sponsors for the day, including Consolidated, along with Christy Barkley of Infinity Real Estate. They make it possible for us to provide this event and with refreshments. Also, thank you, Baker Boy. Thank you, Baker Boy. Please help yourselves. Please note that today's event will be recorded and rebroadcast on Consolidated Channel 18. As you do so, we request that you would silence your cell phone at this time. Thank you. As Dickinson's population has grown, so has this series. While District 37 is entirely within Dickinson city limits, nearly half the population of District 36 now resides in Dickinson as well, while District 39 covers the western edge of Dickinson out to the Montana border. Our elected and appointed leaders have constituents here and elsewhere, but they've chosen to be here today, and we appreciate their time. Today's event features Senator Desiree Van Oosting from District 36, Senator Dean Rummel from District 37, and speaking first will be our Public Service Commissioner, Randy Christmann. During the first hour, we will hear from each of these individuals to update us on their work in Bismarck. During the second hour, we will open up the forum to public questions and comments, limited to 3 minutes per individual. We will conclude no later than noon. And with that being said, at this time, please welcome Public Service Commissioner Randy Christmann.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I got to keep on clock here so that Rich Wardner doesn't holler at me. But one thing I do want to say, I put out some cards like this at the back, and if you grab one or grab a couple, you're free to do that. Tell you a little bit about the commission and the commissioners. And along with me at the commission, we've had a lot of changes in the last few years. A few years ago, Brian Krashus left us when he was appointed tax commissioner, and Sherry Haugen-Huffert was appointed and then subsequently elected to a full term. And so Sherry is one of the other commissioners. And then last fall, with the election of Julie Fedorchak to the U.S. Congress, Jill Kringstead was appointed. And Jill is probably new to a lot of you politically, but she's for many years been very active in the Bismarck area on Republican activities. And she's worked with us at the PSC since I think 2016. She was our accountant and kind of business manager, and just did a wonderful job. So she has worked with every aspect of the Public Service Commission, been in the room. I think Julie and I many times said that the best thing that we've accomplished in the last 12 years was the staff that we've hired, and Jill was instrumental in that. So proud to have her working as a commissioner now, and I think y'all are gonna love getting to know her. We do a lot of things at the Public Service Commission, and most people are familiar probably with one or two, but not so much with all the variety of things that we do there. So I appreciate this kind of an opportunity to just kind of report in and talk about some of these various things that we do that, like I say, a lot of you will be familiar with some of them, but almost nobody with all of them. So one of the big things that attracted me to the Public Service Commission when I was in the state Senate, and so I started working on their budget bills and stuff, is the coal reclamation program. I ranched at Hazen till being elected at the Public Service Commission, and one of my neighbors is 1,000 acres of abandoned spoil piles from before the reclamation laws took effect. And yeah, some people think they're pretty, and some deer live in there in the summer until you have a bad winter and they get starved out and they come to my place to eat the hay. But to me, it's wasteland. And I understand that back in those days, they didn't have the science, they didn't have the equipment, and they needed the energy. so they did what they had to do. But once we got to the 70s and science and equipment got better, we did the right thing and adopted reclamation laws, and now that land goes back into productive farmland again someday when we're done. All those years previous to that, we got a couple thousand acres of abandoned spoil piles. Right now, I think we have like 135 or 140,000 acres in active coal mine permits. And so it is vital that we are doing this. And we have to meet all the standards of the federal program, or else they will come and take it over, which would be a nightmare to our coal mines, because then you'd wait for responsiveness from the federal government. So the coal mines support having the state program. The landowners, or at least I'll say most landowners, I think almost all of them, support having the state program. It's not perfect. We continue to learn, but it's getting better all the time. Along with that, we have an abandoned mine lands program for those coal mine lands that were mined before the reclamation laws took effect in the 70s. Now, it seems like that should be done by now, right? But here's the deal. The money comes from the federal government. We get a grant each year to deal with safety issues on abandoned mine lands. We think of those types of spoil piles. Now, we fix those if they're along the road or something like that. Most of the ones that are really safety issues are taken care of. The real issue, although one of them that we just did a couple years ago, was just northwest of town here. And there was a spot where there was an old pit left over from the surface mine, and people were throwing garbage in there. There was no farm really in eyesight, so that no one got caught, and occasionally it would all burn. And it wasn't really known if that was kids as bonfires accidentally burning the garbage pile, or if the garbage dumpers were burning it to create more room. But we came in and fixed that, and now it's farmed with the rest of that man's land. And so that's the kind of thing we can do, but more importantly in abandoned mine lands, what we're fixing nowadays are the old underground mines, and there are hundreds of them. Occasionally we learn of a new one, because there was really, you're supposed to tell the state, but if they didn't, they didn't. And those things are sitting there, and as time goes, we're getting more and more problems with them. Those voids are under there. They might be 20 feet under the surface. They might be 200 feet under the surface. And as time goes, little by little, that ground falls down into that void, and all of a sudden, as it gets closer to where there's moisture or roots, it starts falling faster, and boom, it caves in. And we're out there to fix those situations if they're near occupied structures, or a lot of our work has to do with roadways. We've worked for several years, and we'll be back again this summer just southeast of town here, on the way to your landfill where that old abandoned coal mine is. And we've got a big new one, Desiree will be interested in this, on the west side of New Salem, where there's some extensive underground mines, and I believe goes underneath the old Highway 2, and we're very worried it may even go under town, but so far we haven't found any tunnels. But that's what we do with abandoned mine lands. That's our reclamation mine land division. Then we have a compliance division. That area of the PSC does multiple things. We have a rail safety program within there. The PSC was originally established in statehood as the Railroad Commission. That's how important rail regulation was at the time. The federal government largely took over regulation and safety, but they do such a poor job of it. They don't hardly have any inspectors. The Castleton accident a few years ago was the tipping point, and the state decided we're going to add 2 inspectors. It's paid for by the diesel tax that the railroads pay, so with more activity comes more tax money to the state. We added these 2 inspectors. They are trained by the Federal Rail Administration. When we find violations, they're reported to the Rail Administration, who handles them. But we've found some very serious accidents waiting to happen through that program. We have a gas pipeline safety program. Not the big pipelines going interstate. This is the kind of pipelines that come into your homes and businesses. And we kind of monitor what the utilities are doing there in order to keep those gas pipelines safe. The thing that I would say impacts everybody every day, we have our weights and measures division within the compliance division. That is what tells you that scales for commercial purposes and gas pumps and diesel fuel pumps are accurate. It's one of those things that what do you do without a regulatory agency? Because I would challenge you, when you go fill up your tank of gas and it says 16 gallons, to tell me whether you're sure you didn't only get 15. We're the ones making sure. And I know from my life before this as a rancher, when I brought a potload of calves in, and so there's over 50,000 pounds selling, if that scales off 1%, that can be a couple $1,000 to me. And so the weights and measures program is vitally important. And also within there, we do oversee the one-call division, whereby if you need to dig and want to make sure you don't hit something and kill yourself, if it's a gas line, you call that in. Within a short time, the utilities are supposed to mark it so you don't hit anything. If they don't, you can turn in a complaint to us. We also do a lot of public education to make people aware of that. Also, if you call and hit something, the utility can turn you in. And so that's what our one-call division does. We don't get a lot of complaints, but when we do, we process those. Probably the thing that keeps us most busy is our Public Utilities Division of the PSC. A number of things fall within that. We have the telecom part that really we don't have a lot of work there anymore. That's largely been deregulated because of cell phones. Most people aren't as desperately in need of their landline service as they once were. The phone companies around the nation have mostly gotten better to where there's not complaints. But we have still had problems here, and we have no control over cell phones, by the way. With landline service, we have regulatory authority, although it's very limited because for decades, the legislature has never defined what adequate service is. So when a complaint comes in and someone's getting pretty bad service, there's nothing in law that says what is adequate. And we don't have a lot of discretion, and so it's hard to enforce. But the good news is the rural telephone cooperatives in North Dakota. And I'm sorry if I'm a little biased in this. Before coming to the PSC, I was a director of West River Telecom. And our co-ops in North Dakota have done such an excellent job, and probably none better than Consolidated out here. There were some selected communities, yeah, thumbs up. There were some communities that years ago, mostly in the 90s, when then it was US West, was selling these communities off. Co-ops were taking them over. Co-ops, in fairness, we do get universal service funding to help with providing service to these large rural areas. And the co-ops acquired those rural areas and rebuilt them and provide this excellent service. But a few areas they didn't sell. Belfield was one of them. We've gotten more complaints from the Belfield area in my 12 years at the PSC, I think, than the rest of the state. In town, pretty good, but the rural area around it, they just never put investment in. And again, they don't get universal service funding. So I understand the disadvantage, but why they wouldn't sell it, I never understood. Through some federal programs, our cooperatives have had the ability to do some work and overbuild some of them. I know some people out north of Belfield who now have service as of last fall and this spring. I don't know if they've quite gotten to everybody yet, but they're on the verge. Our complaints are almost none. I am so grateful for that because that's the part of the job I love the least, is the complaints. We still have some areas in eastern North Dakota around the bigger communities. Those are on the verge of being overbuilt. North Dakota is the closest to having complete broadband service to every home of any state in the nation. People always talk about the digital divide with rural areas, and they think rural areas on the wrong side. North Dakota is the exception. We're on the right side of the digital divide, and it's thanks to the co-ops of North Dakota. So, always excited about that because I revert back to my co-op days. Then we have our Public Utilities Division. Probably the most controversial work we do nowadays. Well, I guess the telephone was in there already. We have siting falls within there. That's where it kind of gets controversial. We don't do distribution, we do transmission lines. It's not just a matter of size, but that's generally the distinction most people make. And I'm talking about power lines as well as pipelines. And in this area, we actually do not have a whole lot of discretion. It's not, a normal part of utility regulation. And so there are siting laws, and we make sure whoever applies and wants to build something meets those standards. So when we approve a project, it doesn't mean we like it. It means they've met the legal requirements. And when we deny a project, sometimes we might wish it was getting built, but it didn't meet those requirements. We have some discretion in there. There are some parts of the siting law that require a certain thing happen or a certain thing not happen unless there is no reasonable alternative. And so in those areas, we have a little discretion. But with siting, it is mostly a matter of making sure they follow the law. In order to get a siting project, a project approved that requires siting, they have to hire engineers. They have to hire lawyers to bring the case. They have to hire environmental scientists to do all the studies that are required. They have to contact about 30 state and federal agencies. Before they put that kind of investment in, they're pretty confident that they meet the requirements of the law. And so that is just the reality that we work with siting. There's big differences in the law in how things are cited right now. Pipelines, according to the law, our siting requirements supersede local ordinances. With electric power lines, part of our siting requirements is that they have to meet the local ordinances. Now, there are little exceptions to that. It's a generality. There is a bill in the legislature right now that would give the electric power lines the same situation as the pipelines. Then there's the regulation of our electric companies, not co-ops. I'm talking about MDU out here, XL Energy, and Otter Tail Power further east and north. There, and as a Republican, you might think, well, deregulate, right? Well, this is an essential service. And if you're sitting here in Dickinson and you're getting your electric service or your natural gas service from MDU, what's your choice? So if they're not regulated, they have a monopoly over you and just have you at a terrible disadvantage. And that's why literally every state in the nation 100 years ago decided this is an area that needs regulation. And so we just generally, we make sure that they can recover their costs for things that are used and useful in providing the services. Like we don't allow the things the checks they write out for cancer walk. Very important thing, but it's not used and useful for providing electricity to you. They can't recover that. That's out of their investors' side of the books. So we allow them to recover their costs, plus a reasonable rate of return on their investments so that they can get investments, because we want them to have good equipment. We want them to have yards full of millions of dollars worth of poles and transformers and cables and such, so that when there's a blizzard, you're not on a backlog waiting for equipment to come in to fix it. And so it's a costly proposition, but we make sure that they recover what they should to be able to give good service, not more, and make a reasonable rate of return on that investment. What's really complicated things in recent years are utilities, and they didn't really have a choice in this. Technically they did, but it's the way the country has gone. They've joined large regional transmission organizations, and North Dakota Utilities have chosen to join two different ones. Basin Electric is part of Southwest Power Pool. There are parts of states from North Dakota down to New Mexico and northern Texas and Louisiana, and then kind of on up to here. And then MDU and the other investor-owned utilities have joined MISO, which is some of the same states, and then states going further east to places like Indiana and Michigan. Because there's so many states, and some of them have much different policy goals for going all green by a certain year and that type of thing, those RTOs, regional transmission organizations, are building out big transmission projects, billions and billions of dollars, and if they're for reliability, I'm all in favor of spreading the costs to us, but my concern is that a lot of these projects are being built only for the purpose of hooking up new renewable generators, wind farms and solar farms. And if that's the case, I'm fighting for that is an interconnection cost that those developers should be paying, not us as customers. But we lost that case about 10 years ago with both the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. That's who approves what the RTOs do. And then it was appealed through the federal courts. It was actually Kentucky or Indiana was the lead case, but that's the case law now. I am interested in developing a new case because there's been a lot of evolution in this. And so I'm working very hard to try and get this changed because of the direction they have gone. One thing to keep in mind with FERC, we think, well, there's a different president, everything has changed now. The FERC commissioners rotate on 5-year schedules unless someone resigns and somebody ends their service cycle in, I think, June or July of each year. The one that's up this year, and I believe he will be reappointed, is one of the Republicans. So it'll actually be a year and a half until one of the Democrats turns over. And so unless someone chooses to resign among the 3 Democrats, President Trump will have a Democrat-controlled FERC for the next year and a half. So this is a big battle, but it is huge. One little project that is started on this path that we're working on right now is going to cost Otter Tail customers in southeast North Dakota about $5.50 a month. And they are talking, just in MISO, this is not SPP, just in MISO, they're talking over the next few years, potentially $100 billion of these projects. So that's a big project that I'm working on and will continue to be. I think I've probably exceeded my 20 minutes by a little bit, but I do want to say before I sign off, for years I've watched Senator Rummel in the Senate. Does such a nice job on the floor that I appreciate his work there as much as I do his great photography. And that's saying a lot. And Senator Van Oosting, watching you grow in your first couple months of the session has been wonderful too. I look forward to many good years of Senate service from you. I'm always keeping a close eye on the Senate after spending 18 years there. If there's time, I'll take some questions, but Carter cut me off though if I'm exceeding.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me. And yes, I am your freshman senator, the newbie. I live on the far east of District 36, east side of District 36. If you look at the map of 36, there's a little bubble on the east side, and that's our house. We were drawn in 22. Prior to that, actually, I was in District 33 with Randy Christmann, so I've known Randy for some time. And I do have another connection to the PSC, actually. I've known your new commissioner since she was a teenager. And then I've also known Julie's father for a little bit prior, years ago. So anyway, some connection there. Whoops, sorry. Okay. Okay. And so, yes, as I said, I live on the far east side of District 36. I've been married to my husband, Bill Van Oosting, for 27 years. Bill works at B&I Coal, so we're definitely connected to the coal industry. He first worked with Coteau and now B&I Coal. I work in Bismarck. I have a small business, and I grew up north of Bismarck on a dairy farm. And in my why into politics is probably my growing up. My mom ran for office in the 80s. She ran in the Governor Olson Sinner race, actually, as an independent. And then she also ran for Senate, and mainly at that time ran to protect small family farms that were being hurt in the 80s, and then also for protection of human life from birth to death. Grew up marching around the state capitol with a stop abortion sign around my neck. So definitely connected to that. And with that, actually kind of connected to the Dickinson area. One of my mom's very good friends was Sharon Wald, Representative Wald's wife. And so sometimes the Wald kids would come out to our dairy farm in the summer and work with us. So that seed was definitely instilled for politics as a teenager. We had some interesting in-depth conversations growing up about politics in North Dakota, and things that would probably surprise you. Anyway, and why I ran, I think 2020 was very inspiring. Along with being involved with District 33 and then now 36. I was away from it for a while, honestly, since leaving home, and then back to it probably in 2014 in District 33 and then 36. And then 2020 just really inspired me. A lot of things that my mom spoke about in the 80s kind of came true in 2020, and I knew what was happening, and I felt like a strong need to get involved. And in the Senate, I serve on a Human Service Committee, Energy and Natural Resources. I belong to 3 caucuses: Rural Caucus, Life Caucus, and of course the Senate Caucus. It's been busy and interesting, and on the ground running from the start. My busy day is Wednesday. Just to give you a picture of what it's like for me as a freshman, we have prayer group, which I value, on Wednesday morning, and then Wednesday evening late is our Senate caucus, so that's my long day. And the other days are kind of mixed with some of those other caucuses. In Human Services, one of the first bills that came through was Senate Bill 2033, which has something to do with rural ambulances and the shortage of rural ambulance. And the ambulance actually that I grew up north of Bismarck in the Wing community, and that ambulance doesn't exist anymore. So the ambulance that came to pick up my mom when she had a stroke and my father when he passed doesn't exist anymore. And so it's a problem. I understood that when that bill came through, and so that is something that is hopefully being solved right now. It is in the House, right, that bill, Senate Bill 2033, and then there's also another bill that we just passed in the Senate that is a study to help emergency services. Badlands search and rescue is involved with that. A lot of people coming to the table to do a study for all emergency services because of the lack of volunteers. And that's essentially why our rural ambulance went away, was the lack of volunteers. Energy and natural resources. One of the things, I guess, I didn't realize that it shocked me, the antelope bill. I didn't realize that that would be the one thing that I would get a lot of email on and a lot of calls on. And it came to a tie vote in the Senate on the floor. I voted one way that day. It was brought back and I voted another way. And the reason why I changed my mind on the antelope bill was actually somebody from Dickinson here who wrote me a letter and told me that it would be another 10 years before they would get a tag. And so that's why I changed my mind on that vote, and I got chewed out for that on the other side. My point with that is that also getting testimony And letters from our constituents is so important. One of the first things I look at when I research a bill, when it's coming into committee or if it's hitting the floor and I don't know something, I read the testimony from you, from everybody who wants to participate and writes us. That's so important. It's a really big part of our decision-making process because it's about you. Something that also came through Energy and Natural Resources was a study on nuclear energy, actually, and Randy was in our committee also. That was of interest. My brother is of interest to me because I think it's a good idea to study that, but also my brother worked in the Navy and worked on a nuclear sub for many years. So we were chit-chatting actually about the bill later and about what the point that Randy brought to the committee was that we need to also make sure we understand and study the element of waste. And so I was talking to my brother about that, but somebody he taught when he was in the Navy was Dwayne Sand. And so Dwayne Sand is a good friend of my brother's, and so he thought that would be a good person to chat with about nuclear waste because he also, I think, served on the Nuclear Waste Commission, or nuclear, I don't have the right name. But anyway, and also eminent domain has been in several bills in energy and natural resources. That's a big part of our time and some of the issues that have come forward. We did hear about that Castleton accident that Randy had touched on. That was fascinating, hearing from the emergency services and what that was like for them, which is another reason why it's good to have the study on volunteers and emergency services and how we need to solve that problem. And I guess that's all I have for now. I'm not as seasoned as the other two that are here who will have, I think, so much more to say. But I thank you for voting for me and thank you for inviting me here today. I'm learning something new every day, and I can't tell you enough how your words, your letters, and your testimony is so important to us. So please keep in touch. Thank you.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. After listening to Commissioner Randy Christmann, I definitely never ever want to be on the Public Service Commission. There's too much work there. And Senator Van Oosting, we all learn every single day. I will guarantee you no longer how long you've been there. There's things that you will always find out. It's surprising how much I don't know. I really find that out when you sit in a position like in the Senate. This morning, what I wanted to do, my two committees are, of course, Finance and Tax and Transportation. Finance and Tax is keeping me a bit busy right now. So let's talk about property taxes. It's what I stated on the floor this past week is I stated that property tax has to be substantial in amount. It has to be sustainable going into the future here. It has to be explainable. I should be able to explain it to you and you should be able to understand it. And lastly, I said it has to be fair. Now that's one of the hardest ones to identify as to what is fair. When we look at the four classifications of property, of course, we're looking at residential, the ones that is getting most attention right now. Of course, we have the agricultural and commercial side of things, and then the centrally assessed. Centrally assessed is really easily explained. It's all of those things that one taxing jurisdiction cannot actually take care of. So it's pipelines, it's transmission lines, it's the airports, the airlines, it's the railroads. It is all of those entities that have to pay property taxes, and it's not easily assessed. And so the state does that for us and pays back to each of the counties. So what the House did for us is they passed us 3 property tax bills into the Senate and 1 income tax bill. And so, real quickly, I'm going to tell you about income taxes. I'm not in favor anymore of reducing income taxes. Last session, House Bill 1158 gave a tremendous amount of relief. I've asked for all of the information from the tax department as to how many people are actually now paying North Dakota state income taxes. Right now, 65% of all the returns filed in the state of North Dakota pay 0. 49% of all the out-of-state, non-resident tax returns pay 0. We cannot continue down this path of income tax reduction. Nobody's complaining to me about income taxes, and if I were to dig in, which I have, I can tell you who is paying. There's really 2 areas that I watch very closely. One is royalty income, so all of those that own minerals. 52% of the royalty income is going to out-of-state tax returns. 48% is in-state. The other portion of personal income tax returns, those that deal with tax, and I see a few people out here that I can point to and understand that Subchapter S and pass-through entities, LLCs and partnerships and things like that, use the individual married tax return rates. Only C corporations, which there's very few left in the state of North Dakota, pay through the corporate tax return. So when you pass those through the individual tax returns and you make a 0 bracket like we have done, a lot of these, everybody gets the benefit because you have to go through the 0 bracket to get to the 1.95% bracket, and then our top rate in income taxes is 2.5%. So we're one of the very lowest in those states that have income tax in the entire state, in the entire United States, of course. So I'm not going to be real interested in 1388, House Bill 1388. It is in our hands right now in the Senate. We will have a hearing this Tuesday, it's Monday, I believe, on that one. We're going to be hearing 3 of the 4 bills that are major, dealing with property taxes and the income tax this coming week. So real quickly, the 3, no, there's nothing quick about talking about property taxes. The 3 remaining property tax bills that the House sent over to us, and by the way, we didn't send any to the House. The Senate didn't approve any. And so these are the only vehicles that, after crossover, we can deal with property tax, are these 3 bills. I like one of them more than the other 2, but I'm going to share with you all 3. And this is how it works. 1168 is a bill, the prime is out of Minot, North Dakota. It's Representative Lauser. What he did is he's buying 10 more mills down on all property classifications. So he's targeting the school mills to do that. So the state has 60 school mills left. We're buying 10 of those down, so there'd be 50 left. So that's the proposal. The fiscal note on this is $120,665,000. So it's the lowest of all 3 of these. It doesn't meet my substantial test. $120 million is not going to do it. We will have another measure 4 if we deal with only $120 million. And I hate to say only $120 million. That's a lot of money. $120 million is a lot of money. But that's not going to be enough for property tax relief to keep those individuals from doing another measure 4. This particular bill also does a lot of other things. The one thing I don't like is it removes the limit on property tax levies for school districts only. Now, I'm a former school district board member, Dickinson Public Schools. I had 11 years on the school board. When you do not, he's exempting that political subdivision and not any of the others. So cities, counties, park districts, townships, they are going to have a cap here that I'll talk about in a minute. But he relieves school districts from having any cap, any levy limitation. All the rest of them, again, have a 3% limit on the dollars that they're levying. They can also carry unused levy authority forward. You'll hear that on the other bills too. So if a county or a city only increases by 2%, they can bank 1% and pick that up in future years. And you can the way he has it set up, you can only do it for the preceding year. He's only allowing you to do that for 1 year. Now, these other bills will give more time to use that additional levy that we can talk about. You can go above that with a vote of the people. He requires 60%, a supermajority of all the electors, and it has to be at a statewide primary or general election. And again, it's 60%. You can go forward for 5 additional taxable years if you do that. So if you take it to a vote of the people, and they say, yes, go ahead and increase my property taxes higher than 3%, I can do it for 5 more years. Now, I don't see a lot of appetite for that personally. I think we would want to be careful with that, and I don't know how many votes would actually pass, but that is one of the outs that House Bill 1168 did provide. The only other thing that he allows to make an adjustment is you can add new property to your base. In other words, as new construction comes on, you can add that to your taxable base before you apply the 3%. And that makes a lot of sense. So if you're in a growing political sub, you should have the advantage of those additional taxes. There is no homestead tax adjustment in this bill. There is no renter's credit in this bill either. So that, in a nutshell, is 1168. 1575 is the next one that they sent us. House Bill 1575 was sponsored by Speaker Wise, so Representative Wise out of the House. It has a fiscal note of $703,220,000 on it. I'm afraid that is substantial. It's not sustainable. We can't afford $703 million. It's not going to make it. We'd have to have some terrible cuts into the general fund to make this happen. All of them are trying to use up all of the legacy fund interest earnings. And we know exactly, due to Senator Wardner, we know exactly what that is. It's $601 million. That's what we have for interest earnings off of the legacy fund that we can now invest and spend. Of that amount, they have a commitment of $103 million for the bond payment for all of the infrastructure that went to the east of us, which primarily deals with flooding problems in Fargo. We have to make that payment. It's $103 million. $100 million has to go into the highway fund. We have to make sure we can match all the federal dollars when it comes to highway construction. We got to put that $100 million has to go. So we got $203 million of that committed. The remainder of it will all go to property tax reduction, the entire amount. It's just under $400 million. It's $398 million. So that will go for property tax reduction. So when you see $703 million minus the $398 million, the rest of it will have to come out of the general fund. That's the only place we can go with it. And we can't swing that. It's not possible. So we got one here that is substantial. It's not affordable. The other thing that I can't do with this very easily is explain to you how much are you going to get. So if I can point to you right there, how much are you going to get with your primary residence? I can't tell you that because what he's doing is he's changing the formula. The formula of how we get to taxable and your tax amount is not easy. So we start with a number called true and full value. So there's a true and full value placed on every one of your primary residences. From that, for years, they take 50%. So you take it times 50%, and then residential property is times 9%. And then we get to the amount that that's the taxable amount that we put the mill levy on. So whatever the mill levy comes in, so if statewide we're at 236 mills, you could take it times 236 mills, and statewide that would be your average. What 1575 does is it takes that formula, true and full value times 50% times 6.25%. He's dropping it 2 3/4%. What it does, though, is that's almost a third of your property taxes that he's reducing. But I can't tell you, any one of you, how much it's going to affect you, because you have to go back to your true and full value. You got to take it through your formula, take it times your mill levy, and then you could tell me what you're going to get. And that's just a hard explanation. The other thing he does is he takes commercial and agricultural, which in that formula they're at true and full value times 50% times 10%. So true and on commercial and ag, they're at a 10%, and so is centrally assessed. Residential is at 9%. Okay, 10, 9. We're going to take the 10% on just commercial and agricultural down to 8.5%. Now, that does give broad-based, that's why it costs so much, $703 million. But also, we're leaving out centrally assessed. We will almost automatically have a lawsuit because the legislature just took and picked a winner and a loser there. We got commercial and agriculture that's going to get it. Centrally assessed is not going to get it. All the centrally assessed has lots of deep pockets. I would guess almost immediately we should put another $3 or $4 million into the Attorney General's budget because we're going to get sued. You either do it across all properties, you just can't pick one or the other, because there's a commerce issue from a federal standpoint that's going to get in the way there. And so that is a severe problem, I believe, in this bill that we'd want to be careful. Now, he does touch the homestead credit, just like all the others. So if I take you real quickly through that, anybody who's 65 years and above, we removed the asset test. And if you make less than, right now, less than $70,000, the state will pay half of your taxes up to a maximum of $9,000 on a $200,000 true and full value house. I know that's a lot of numbers. He is raising the brackets from $70,000 to $80,000 for half, $40,000 to $50,000 for 100% of your property taxes being paid. Nobody in the state of North Dakota who is 65 or over, who is on fixed income, should ever lose their house. That never should happen if they apply for all the credits that are available to them. Because not only are they available for the homestead tax credit, they also get the primary resident tax credit. And if they're a disabled veteran, they qualify for all three. And it goes through disabled veteran is first, homestead tax credit is second, primary resident is third. And so if anybody tells you that we're losing houses to fixed income people over 65, the elderly, that should never happen, never. And so he does adjust the caps there by just taking that particular amount up. Those caps that he's dealing with are troubling, because usually the caps that I'm going to talk about later are caps on the budget, dollars. This bill puts a cap on taxable valuation. Why is that bad? And that's even a harder explanation. Initially, for 1 year, it's probably going to work out just fine. 10 years, we're going to have a huge problem. What's the huge problem? You're capping all the existing property at 3% maximum increase in taxable valuation each year. If somebody comes in and builds a new facility, they are now subject to whatever they paid to build that facility, and it could be sitting right next to you. So you could have neighbors sitting next to each other with the same size houses. It's just that this one was built earlier and this one's been around for 20 years. You're going to be capping them 3% at most. It will not keep up with this new construction here, and you're going to have neighbors next to each other. One's going to pay a whole lot higher taxes than the other one's sitting right next to it. You will have a war if you cap taxable valuation. You can't cap that. I think that's the worst thing that any of us could do. So that's brief on 1575. I don't think there's anything else bad that I like or don't like about this one. He has an out on 1575 too. His is a little bit different. You can increase by a vote of the people in this particular bill. By the way, this bill, all these bills are multiple pages long. I had to put summaries together on all of these this past week just because, one's 21 pages long, one's 10, one's 36. And when you start looking at these, you get dizzy. I do especially. Anyway, the excuse me, the cap that they have on that one, you can take it to a vote of the people to increase that mill levy authority above 3% for 6 years at a time. So that vote they can take to the general primary election, get a 6-year reprieve for the increase above the 3%. And again, I just don't know who's going to do that, but it is in there. There's an out. The last property tax bill is 1176. This is it's been called the governor's one. It is sponsored by Representative Nathy out of Bismarck. That particular bill is the one that I'm most interested in because it seems to make the most sense. So, real quickly, this is the one that will take it from $500 to $1,450. So, I can explain it to you. You're all going to get $1,450 on your primary residences. So, it meets that. The fiscal note on this one is $553 million. It is substantial. I can barely afford this one, but I can. $74 million has to come out of the general fund to swing this one. So I'm close. If I use legacy fund earnings, the next biennium will be completely out of the general fund. The legacy fund earnings will take care of all of the property tax relief, and that's a good position to be in because the legacy fund has $12 billion in it. It is generating this, and we don't have to rely on taxation to get it. That's why it's good. We exclude voter-approved mill levies. What does that mean? Dickinson Public School passed a bond issue recently. That is a voter-approved mill levy. The state will not pay any of those. You are responsible for it. If you voted on that and said yes, and it's in your district, and that is statewide, why is that important? I made sure that was in the bill for one reason. We have some cities that are a little bit more liberal than others. So Fargo comes to mind, every once in a while. Fargo did some things. They have an unlimited mill levy on their school district. And when they have an unlimited mill levy on their school district, the voters approve that above the 60 mills. They're at 127 mills, 67 mills higher. It would be unfair if the state said, we'll pay those too, along with the 60 that everybody else is getting. It's not fair. If you voted to increase your taxes, you should pay for those. So all voter-approved mill levies stay with the taxing jurisdiction and will be on your property taxes if you voted for it. So it makes it even throughout the entire state. Those that don't have bond issues or special mill levies will be just fine. Those that aren't, all of you will probably still receive a property tax statement because I've not seen very many taxing jurisdictions that don't have voter-approved mill levies. Plus, there's a 1 mill that the UND Medical School gets. That does not go away. And there's some, Garrison Diversion, there's some water conversion districts that have some mills on water. We also require that you prorate this if you buy a house, that this be taken into consideration. One of your commissioners here by the name of Neil Messer made sure that I put that in to make sure that on real estate transactions that it be taken into account when we have a closing statement on the sale of a piece of property. And we're also going to do a 5th property classification in year 2. We're going to actually put primary residents on their own. The reason we're going to put primary residents on their own right now is you have an application process that you have to go through. It's pretty easy this year. Those of you who did it last year, if you signed on, it's a one-click deal. It takes you 30 seconds and you get approved really quickly. Putting a 5th property classification in there says that you probably won't have to apply anymore, because we'll know who is primary residences in the state of North Dakota. So it gets rid of the application process. It'll actually happen on its own. We have to update all of the transactions as they happen. There's some mechanics that the tax commissioner will have to work out. I'm sure glad I'm not in his shoes either. We also fixed the trust issue in here. There was people who had homes, primary residences in trusts. They are included. And we also have an emergency clause on this particular bill. It'll go into effect immediately as soon as we get it through and it's signed. And that would be really important if we could get this really fast through the legislature. But you know, nothing happens fast through the legislature. The homestead tax credit, as I explained earlier, is exactly the same as the previous one. It raises the limits from $40,000 to $50,000 and $70,000 to $80,000 on the top side. So we have that. This one has a renter's credit in it also. There's a credit available for renters, if you didn't know that, of $400. It has been in existence for quite a few years. It's going to $600 in this particular bill. It does have a cap. These caps work a little different because it's a 3% on dollars. It is also based on the base year. For those of you who want to know what the base year is, the auditor or the treasurer in the county actually goes through a mill levy worksheet in which they take a look at the 3 previous years, the highest of the 3 previous years for taxable amount, plus your new property additions minus your abatements, gives you a new total that we can put the 3% on. So it allows all of these political subs to, again, take advantage of the growth in that district. Or if they are declining rapidly, it allows them to look back 3 years to save them so they don't go out of business. And I think that's really important. We also have, you can bank on this one too. This one allows you to bank preceding 5 years, and it always drops off. Now, if you calculate that, it comes out exactly the same. What we're trying to do is not get every political subdivision to go up 3% automatically just because they have a 3% cap. If they decide to go up 2%, they get to bank 1%. But if you mathematically figure that out, it's exactly the same no matter what you do there. Lastly, you can exceed the limit on this one with a majority. This is a simple majority of the voters can do that. For a 4-year time frame, it has to be at a general election only. There is no primary on this one, it's just a general election. So those are your 3 property tax bills that the Senate has to deal with at this point in time. We're just starting the hearing process because we just got those this past week. So we'll go through the hearings and we have to figure out what to do. And so if you have any great advice for me, I'd be happy to hear what you feel and any questions that you would have, of course. But with that, I know I overran my time frame. I certainly want to thank the previous 2 presenters for being here, and I will be available for any questions.
Well, the great advice portion of the day from the crowd to you is coming up next. But if I will real soon be looking for a show of hands if you have a public question or comment. We do have some time constraints. We would limit you to 3 minutes on any given topic. If I hand you a card, that puts you in line to ask your question without having to stand in a line. And then we would also say, if I hand you the microphone, and I will, this is to pick up your question on the recorded consolidated channel 18. I'm looking for hands for questions to Public Service Commissioner Christmann first, and then all other topics after that. Questions for Randy Christmann? Show me your hand. There we go. Okay, we'll go there first. Any others? Show hands.
Does the affect South Dakota passing that last legislation last week affect North Dakota at all? For the eminent domain?
That would be a question that only that applicant could answer, you know, whether they're going to keep working on it down there, give up, seek an alternative route. I don't have any way of knowing, but their laws are different than our laws, so it's kind of up to the company.
With all of the data centers, AI, all of that that is being looked at in the state, what kind of impact is that going to have on our electrical grid, and what has to come before the PSC for that?
It's huge. It's a great question, and one that we're working very hard on because they can have monumental impacts. Remember, when a utility is serving that customer, they become what, at least in SPP area, that's the area, the transmission organization that I work most closely with, they become an LRE, a load responsible entity. Now, they are responsible to have enough capability to serve all their customers. And so, for one thing, these things pop up in months. That means they can leave in months too. Now you've built a new power plant. We approved it. They leave, and you don't have as many customers anymore, but all the rest of us get to pay for that new power plant. That's one problem. That hasn't really materialized. But depending on where they pop up, it can also cause what is called congestion on the transmission lines. And those transmission organizations charge for that in order to lessen the congestion and not burn them up. So within North Dakota, we have a data center that got built in somewhere that, in my opinion, was a bad spot at that time. Once there's some more transmission lines coming in the next few years, once those are built, it'll probably be a good spot. Right now, it's a bad spot. It caused enough congestion, and even though MDU has nothing to do with this, everyone shares the transmission lines. You don't control where your electrons flow to your customer. It goes how electricity works. Only electrical engineers understand that. So then MDU has to pay for it, even though it's not going on their line. It is costing every MDU, the average residential customer, over $7 a month because of that data center. However, MDU serves a data center over at Allendale, which I'm glad to say is being expanded significantly. That one is in a very good spot. By the way, congestion charges can go either way, whether it's because there's too much electricity there or not enough. In the case I was just talking about, it's not enough. Down by Allendale, there was too much. It was sitting there. It couldn't go anywhere. So that company built a data center where there was too much electricity. It is lessening congestion charges. MDU is selling them power and making a profit on it. And we, the PSC, set the rate such that all of MDU's customers are experiencing a significant reduction in your rates because of that data center. It's a winner for all of you at this point. And so they can have huge impact. It just depends on where they're at and how the transmission system is set at the time. But if we go, as some have talked about, where there's data centers coming in, each one being thousands of megawatts, we just need a lot more generation. And if it's renewable generation, that load responsible entity has a responsibility to serve them. And so what do they do when the renewable isn't working? They need some kind of backup unless their agreement calls for that to be an interruptible load. And if it's not a company that we regulate, we don't really know that. Last thing I just want to say is, as you're hearing about these things with megawatts and data centers and stuff, the one that kind of caused the problems, we don't regulate them, so I don't know for sure. I've heard it's around probably a little over 200 megawatts. The one that's operating at Allendale and bringing all these benefits to MDU customers is around 200. It will ultimately be over 500. What does that mean to you? MDU is the company that serves Bismarck and Mandan as well. The outskirts are cooperative, but the heart of it. For decades, MDU's single biggest load is the Tesoro refinery. That's outside of Mandan. For Bismarck, Mandan, and the Tesoro refinery, that's less than 200 megawatts.